Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My story isn't one of explosive confrontations or screaming matches in the pouring rain, the kind you see in movies. It's a quiet story, a slow burn of realization that unfolds in the silent spaces of a shared home, in the cold, hard numbers of a bank statement, and in the hollow echo of a dream turning to dust. It began, as many stories do, with love and a shared vision for the future, a vision so clear and bright it blinded me to the rot growing just beneath the surface. For 15 years, Ilara and I had built a life together, or so I believed. We weren't wealthy, not by a long shot, but we were diligent, we were planners. Our grand plan, the culmination of every extra shift I took at the plant and every freelance design project she completed late into the night, was a small house by a lake. It wasn't just a structure of wood and glass, it was our sanctuary, our end goal, the physical manifestation of our partnership. I had a picture of it, torn from a travel magazine a decade ago, pinned to the corkboard in our small home office. The paper was yellowed and the corners were soft from being touched so often, a testament to the longevity of our dream. I could describe every detail of that imagined life. The way the morning sun would hit the porch, the specific brand of coffee we'd drink while looking out over the water, the feel of the worn wooden floorboards under our bare feet. It was a future I was actively building, brick by painful brick, dollar by hard-earned dollar. Our method for saving was old-fashioned, a little eccentric perhaps in this digital age, but it was ours. We had a heavy, fireproof safe bolted to the floor in the back of my closet, hidden behind a row of old winter coats. Every Friday, without fail, I would withdraw a portion of our paychecks in cash, crisp, clean bills, and add it to the growing stacks inside. It was a ritual. The solid clunk of the safe door, the smell of ink and paper, the tangible weight of our progress. It made the dream feel real, within reach. Ilara used to love this ritual. In the early years, she'd be right there with me, her eyes sparkling as I'd place another banded stack inside, her hand on my arm. She would whisper about which room would be hers for painting, where we'd plant the garden, how our life would finally be simple and quiet. But over the last year or so, her participation waned. She'd be busy, she'd say, on a call with a client, or just tired. I didn't think much of it at the time. Life gets in the way, routines change, and the initial excitement of a long-term goal naturally fades into a comfortable, steady pursuit. I mistook her growing indifference for contentment, her silence for peace. I was a fool. The first crack in my perfect little world was almost invisible, a hairline fracture I barely noticed. Ilara started working later. Her freelance business, she claimed, was booming. I was proud of her, of course. I'd bring her dinner to the office, find her staring intently at her screen, and I'd retreat, not wanting to break her focus. Then came the new clothes, more expensive than she'd usually buy. She deserved to treat herself, I thought. She worked hard. The excuses were always plausible, always just reasonable enough to quell the tiny, whispering doubt in the back of my mind. She was meeting a new client for dinner. She was attending a networking event. She was taking a weekend workshop to hone her skills. I was the supportive husband, the one who held down the fort, who made sure the bills were paid and the house was in order while she built her empire. I was so focused on our future lake house that I failed to see that the foundation of our current house was crumbling. The real alarm bell, the one I couldn't ignore, rang not in my heart but in my bank account. I handle our finances with meticulous precision. It's just my nature. I was reconciling our monthly statements when I saw a recurring charge I didn't recognize. A charge for a boutique hotel downtown, the kind of place people go when they don't want to be found. It wasn't just once, it was every other Tuesday for the past 3 months. My blood ran cold. My first instinct was denial, a desperate scramble for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a fraudulent charge. Maybe she was booking rooms for clients, a strange but not impossible business expense. I didn't confront her. Confrontation wasn't my style, and more than that, I was terrified. To ask the question was to be ready for an answer I couldn't bear to hear. So I did something I'm not proud of. I started to watch. I became a detective in my own life, a stranger in my own marriage. I paid attention to the mileage on her car, to the way she angled her phone away from me when a text came in, to the faint, unfamiliar scent of a cologne that clung to her coat. Each small discovery was another twist of the knife, a slow, agonizing confirmation of my deepest fears. The day I found out for sure was a Tuesday. She told me she had a late-night work session with a new client, a big contract she was trying to land. She kissed me goodbye, a quick, passionless peck on the cheek that felt more like an obligation than an act of affection. An hour after she left, I got in my car.
I drove to the boutique hotel from the bank statements, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I parked across the street, my heart pounding a frantic, sickening rhythm against my ribs. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. A sleek, expensive car I'd never seen before pulled up to the valet. A man got out, tall and confident in a tailored suit, the kind of man who looked like he was born into money, not someone who saved for it in a dusty safe. And then I saw her, Ilara. She emerged from the passenger side, laughing, a genuine, carefree laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in years. She looked radiant, beautiful, alive. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him with a familiarity that shattered what was left of my heart. They walked into the hotel, their bodies close, their movements synchronized. I sat there in the silence of my car, the engine off, the world outside continuing on as if mine hadn't just ended. I watched the hotel entrance for what felt like an eternity, a hollow, aching void opening up inside me. But the worst was yet to come. A few hours later, my numbness gave way to a cold, burning rage. I needed to know everything. I accessed our joint account online, my fingers trembling as I typed. I expected to see the hotel charge, but I found something far worse. A huge cash withdrawal. $10,000, made that very afternoon, from the account I exclusively used to fund our dream. The cash, our cash, the money I'd worked double shifts for, the money from weekends I'd sacrificed, holidays I'd missed. And then I saw the pattern, a series of large withdrawals stretching back months, always a day or two before her client meetings or workshops. It wasn't just an affair. She was financing it with our future. She was stealing our dream and handing it over to him. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring into meaningless streaks. I walked into our quiet house, the air thick with her lies. I went to the closet, my movements stiff, robotic. I opened the safe. The stacks of money were there, but they looked different, diminished. I didn't need to count them to know how much was gone. I could feel the lightness, the absence. She had the combination. I had trusted her with everything, with the key to our future, and she had been raiding it, piece by piece, to build a new life with someone else. I sank to the floor, the cold metal of the safe pressing against my back, the remaining stacks of our life savings feeling like a mockery. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight that threatened to crush me. I could have confronted her. I could have screamed and cried and thrown things. I could have demanded answers, demanded remorse. But as I sat there in the dark, surrounded by the remnants of my broken dream, another feeling began to surface, pushing through the pain. It was a cold, clear, and calculating thought, an idea so audacious it almost made me laugh. She thought I was a fool. She thought I was a simple, predictable man who would either break down or lash out. She underestimated me. She underestimated my patience, my meticulous nature. She was taking our money, but money was just paper. It could be replaced. I looked at the stacks of cash, and then I looked at my hands. I had built our savings from nothing. I could do it again, but this time it would be different. This time, the money would be a weapon. I wouldn't just watch her leave. I would help her along the way. I would pave her exit with the very thing she craved, and I would watch her walk right into a trap of her own making. The plan began to form in my mind, not born of hot-headed anger, but of an icy, profound resolve. She wanted the money, she could have it, every last penny. Or at least, she could have what looked like it. My grief wasn't gone, but it had a new companion, purpose. My dream of a lake house was dead, but a new, darker project was just beginning. The days that followed my discovery were a masterclass in deception, a silent, one-man play performed on the stage of our shared life. I became the best actor I never knew I could be. I smiled when Alara walked in the door. I asked about her work. I listened to her fabricated stories of demanding clients and stressful deadlines with a feigned empathy that should have won me an award. On the outside, I was the same Kaylin she had known for 15 years, steady, supportive, perhaps a little boring. But on the inside, a quiet, methodical revolution was taking place. The first step of my plan was research, and I dove into it with the same obsessive focus I had once reserved for lake house floor plans. I spent hours upon hours in the shadowy corners of the internet, navigating forums and websites I never knew existed, learning about the art of counterfeit currency. I wasn't looking for cheap, blurry fakes that a child could spot. I needed perfection. I needed bills that could pass a cursory inspection, bills that felt right, that had the correct texture and weight. I learned about polymer blends, watermarks, security threads, and microprinting. My home office, once a shrine to our future, became a laboratory of vengeance. I ordered specialized paper from a supplier in Germany, high-resolution printers from Japan, and custom inks that mimic the exact shades used in real currency. It was a significant investment, a gamble using the very real, very depleted funds I had left. Every purchase was a risk, every transaction, made through encrypted channels and temporary email addresses. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, a man who operated in the digital shadows, and I found it disturbingly easy. While Alara was out at her networking events, I was in the basement, hunched over a light table, practicing. My first attempts were clumsy, the results disappointing, but I am nothing if not patient. I refined my process, calibrating the printers, adjusting the ink saturation, learning the delicate art of aging the bills just enough to make them look circulated. I would take one of my finished products and place it next to a real bill, studying them under a magnifying glass for hours, searching for any imperfection. Slowly, painstakingly, my craft improved. The bills became indistinguishable from the real thing to the naked eye. They had the right snap, the right feel. I even managed to replicate the subtle, almost imperceptible raised texture of the printing. The first time I successfully created a stack of $100 bills that I couldn't tell apart from a genuine stack, a cold sense of triumph washed over me. It wasn't joy, it was the grim satisfaction of a craftsman perfecting his tool. The next phase of the plan was the replacement. This required careful timing and nerves of steel. I started watching Alara's patterns, correlating her late nights with the cash withdrawals from our account. I realized she never took the money from the safe herself. She would ask me to. It was a twisted piece of her manipulation, making me an unwitting accomplice in my own betrayal. She would come to me with a plausible reason, a large deposit for a venue for a client's event, a bulk purchase of art supplies, and I, the trusting husband, would open the safe and hand her the cash. She never knew the combination herself. She just knew how to get me to use it. This made my task both easier and more psychologically torturous. The first time I made the switch was the hardest. She asked for $5,000 for a refundable deposit on a commercial printing press for a huge project. Her eyes were bright with feigned excitement as she told me about the career-making opportunity. I listened, nodded, and told her how proud I was. My heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. I went to the closet, my hands steady despite the tremor I felt deep inside. I opened the safe. Inside, I had two separate sections now, the dwindling pile of real currency and my growing stacks of meticulously crafted fakes. I counted out 50 of my counterfeit $100 bills, banded them together, and placed them in a thick bank envelope. The real $5,000 I discreetly moved to a new, smaller safe I had installed in my workshop in the basement, a place she never went. I walked back into the living room and handed her the envelope. She took it with a brilliant smile, thanking me, telling me it was all for us, for the lake house. The ease with which she lied was breathtaking. I watched her put the envelope in her expensive handbag, a bag I now realized was probably purchased with my money. I felt a surge of nausea, but I pushed it down, replacing it with the cold, hard certainty of my purpose. I had crossed a line. I was no longer a victim. I was a participant, an architect of her eventual downfall. Over the next few months, the pattern repeated itself. She would invent a reason, a business cost, a necessary expense, and I would provide the funds from my ever-growing stock of counterfeit cash. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. With each transaction, my performance grew stronger, my resolve harder. I learned to mask the flicker of contempt in my eyes, to control the tightening in my jaw when she spun her elaborate tales. I became a ghost in my own marriage, my body present but my mind elsewhere, calculating, planning, observing. I watched as she used my fake money to fund her affair. I saw the new jewelry she wore, the receipts from fancy restaurants that she carelessly left in her car, the weekend bags she packed for her business trips. I knew that her lover, a man I'd only seen once but whose face was burned into my memory, was reaping the benefits of my labor, or rather, the facsimile of it. I imagined them in their boutique hotel room, laughing, celebrating their cleverness, spending the worthless paper I had so carefully crafted. The thought didn't bring me as much pain as it once did. It was replaced by a grim, patient anticipation. I was setting a long and elaborate fuse, and I was content to wait for the explosion. The most difficult part was maintaining the facade of our shared dream. She still talked about the lake house, but now it was with a tone of distant, almost condescending nostalgia, as if it were a charming but childish fantasy we would soon outgrow. She'd suggest a new, more ambitious plan, a city penthouse, an investment in her lover's startup, I presumed. I would gently redirect her, reminding her of our original goal, pulling out the old, tattered magazine picture. I had to keep the dream alive in her mind because the safe was the key to my entire plan. As long as she believed it was full of our future, she would keep drawing from it. And as long as she kept drawing from it, she was weaving herself tighter and tighter into my trap. One evening, she came home glowing. She announced that she had landed the biggest contract of her career, a massive rebranding project for a luxury brand. It would require, she explained, a significant upfront investment in equipment and talent. She needed $50,000. It was the largest single amount she had ever asked for. She presented it as our final push, the last big sacrifice before we could finally relax and buy the lake house, maybe even a bigger one than we'd planned. She had spreadsheets and projections, a beautiful, elaborate fiction to support her request. I looked at the document she'd so carefully prepared, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been admiration for the sheer audacity of her deceit. She was a true artist, just not in the way she claimed. I agreed without hesitation. That night, I spent hours in the basement, printing and preparing the final batch. My hands moved with an expert's precision. This was my masterpiece of deception. The next morning, I opened the safe. The last of the real money had already been transferred to my hidden location. All that remained were my perfect forgeries. I counted out the $50,000, stacking the crisp bills on the desk. She came and stood behind me, placing her hands on my shoulders. "This is it, Kaylin," she whispered, her voice thick with fake emotion. "Everything is about to change for us." I looked at our reflection in the darkened window of the office. I saw a man I barely knew standing next to a woman who was a complete stranger. "I know," I said, my voice even. I handed her the heavy envelope. She kissed me, a long, lingering kiss that felt like poison. I didn't flinch. I played my part. I was the loving husband, the supportive partner, the fool. As she walked out the door with a confident stride, $50,000 of worthless paper in her bag, I knew this was the beginning of the end. The fuse was lit. All I had to do now was wait for her new life, the one she had bought with my stolen future, to go up in flames. And I would be there to watch the ashes fall. With the $50,000 gone, a strange and unsettling calm settled over our house. The grand deception was complete, the trap fully set. My part in the active phase of the plan was over. Now, I was merely an observer, waiting for the consequences of Ilara's actions to ripen and fall. The weeks that followed were a surreal continuation of my performance. Ilara was buoyant, practically floating through our life with a detached, euphoric energy. She spoke excitedly about her project, using vague but impressive-sounding business jargon. She was renting a new studio space, she said, hiring assistants, meeting with high-profile stakeholders. In reality, I knew she was liquidating her life with me. She was preparing for her exit. The signs were subtle, but to my hyper-aware senses, they were as loud as air raid sirens. She started discreetly selling some of her old design equipment online. Prized possessions, things she once claimed she could never part with, were suddenly listed on marketplace sites. She began sorting through her personal belongings, packing boxes under the guise of spring cleaning, which she then stored in a small unit she'd rented, the receipts for which I found in the trash. She was methodically erasing herself from our home, piece by piece, all while maintaining the charade of building our future. My role was to play the oblivious, trusting husband. I helped her carry boxes to her car. I feigned interest in the swatches and mood boards for her phantom project. I nodded along as she complained about the stress of it all. Each lie she told was another brick in the wall she was building between us. But she had no idea that I was on the other side, watching her every move, holding the detonator. The tension was immense, a constant low hum beneath the surface of our daily interactions. There were moments I felt my composure crack, moments I wanted to scream and demand to know how she could be so cruel, so casually destructive. One evening, she was showing me photos on her phone from a client dinner and accidentally swiped one photo too far, revealing a picture of her and her lover. It was a selfie. They were on a beach somewhere, their heads close together, smiling, the sun setting behind them. She snatched the phone back immediately, her face pale, her excuse about it being an old photo of a friend, clumsy and transparent. I looked her directly in the eye, held her gaze for a beat too long, and simply said, "It looks nice." I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, a momentary panic, but she quickly recovered, changing the subject. She thought she'd had a close call. She had no idea that I knew everything, that her slip-up was utterly meaningless in the grand scheme of what was to come. I wasn't interested in a confession. I was interested in consequences. The tipping point arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, about 2 months after I'd given her the last of the fake money. I received a certified letter in the mail. It was from a law firm. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened it. Inside were divorce papers. The documents were cold and clinical, citing irreconcilable differences. She was being generous, her lawyer's letter explained. She wasn't asking for the house. I could keep it. She wasn't asking for alimony. All she wanted was what was in her personal accounts and the business investment capital I had provided her, which she now claimed was a gift to help her start her independent life. It was all there, laid out in black and white, her meticulously planned betrayal, sanitized by legal terminology. She had finally made her move. I sat at the kitchen table, the rain lashing against the window, and I read the papers over and over. There was no sadness, no shock, just the quiet, grim finality of it all. That evening, she came home and broke the news. She performed her role perfectly, crying crocodile tears, telling me she just wasn't happy anymore, that she needed to find herself, that it wasn't my fault. It was a speech she had likely rehearsed 100 times in front of a mirror. I listened patiently, a blank expression on my face. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I didn't ask for an explanation.
My silence unnerved her more than any outburst could have. When she finished her monologue, her tears magically drying up, I simply nodded. "Okay, Alara," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "If that's what you want." Her relief was palpable. She had expected a fight, a messy, drawn-out battle. Instead, she got a quiet, swift surrender. She told me she'd be staying with a friend for a while and would be moved out by the end of the week. The friend, I knew, was her lover, and the while was forever. The next few days were a blur of activity as she packed up the last of her life with me. I watched her go, a silent sentinel in the home we had built together. The day she left for good, she stood at the door, her suitcases by her feet. She tried for one last moment of manufactured sentimentality. "I really did love you once, Kaylin," she said, her voice soft. "I hope one day you can understand." I just looked at her, at this stranger who wore my wife's face. "The papers are on the table," I said. "I've already signed them." She left without another word. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the house was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence I had once dreamed of for our lake house. It was the heavy, sterile silence of a crime scene. But my work wasn't done. The fuse had been burning for months, and I knew it was about to reach the charge. I gave it 2 weeks. I imagined her and her lover setting up their new life. I pictured them leasing a fancy apartment, buying new furniture, putting down a deposit on a new car. I pictured them using my carefully crafted, worthless paper to build a foundation for their future, a foundation made of sand. Then I made a single, anonymous phone call. I didn't call the police. That would be too simple, too quick. My revenge was designed to be a slow, creeping poison, not a swift execution. I called the fraud department of the largest bank in the city. I didn't give my name. I simply said that I was a former employee of a high-end printing company and had reason to believe that a man, and I gave them her lover's name, Julian Vance, a name I had easily discovered, was involved in a sophisticated counterfeit operation. I mentioned that he was known to make large cash deposits at various branches and was likely trying to launder a significant amount of fake currency into the banking system. I gave them his description and the model of his expensive car. I suggested they might want to flag his account and perhaps pay closer attention to any large cash transactions he made. Then I hung up. That was it. I had planted the seed of suspicion in the one place it was guaranteed to grow, a financial institution. Banks have zero tolerance for counterfeiting. An anonymous tip like mine wouldn't be ignored. It would trigger a quiet, internal investigation that would scrutinize every move Julian made. He and Ilara, in their blissful arrogance, would have no idea they were under a microscope. Now, all the pieces were in place. Ilara had her freedom, Julian had his investment capital, and the banking system had a red flag next to his name. I envisioned the scene, Julian walking into a bank, confident and smug, with a briefcase full of my fake bills, trying to make a down payment on their shared future. I imagined the teller's polite smile as she took the money, the quiet call to a manager, the discreet check under a UV light, the discovery of the missing security features that were invisible to the naked eye but glaringly obvious to a professional. The trap was about to spring, and I had a front row seat. I sold the house, the one filled with too many ghosts and lies. I packed a single bag, took the very real money from my hidden safe, and I left. I didn't know where I was going, but it wasn't back to the life I had. My final act was to set up a series of online alerts, keyword triggers for the names Julian Vance and Ilara Vance, because I knew she'd take his name as fast as she could. I wanted to be notified of any news articles, public records, or legal filings that mentioned them. My quiet revenge was automated. I didn't need to watch anymore.
The system would watch for me. The show was about to begin. I drove for 3 days with no destination in mind, letting the road unravel before me like a long gray ribbon. The monotony of the highway was a balm, the drone of the engine a replacement for the thoughts that had been screaming in my head for months. I was adrift, But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control. I had severed the past, cauterized the wound, and now I was simply moving forward. I finally stopped in a small, quiet town nestled in the mountains, a place that looked like it had been lifted straight from the pages of the magazine that had once held my dreams. I rented a small cabin on the edge of a real lake, the water so clear it mirrored the sky perfectly. It was a bitter irony, but it felt right, like I was reclaiming a piece of the dream she had stolen. But this time, it was just for me. I spent my days hiking, reading, and learning the simple art of being alone. I didn't check the news alerts I had set up. I forced myself to wait. The first act of my revenge was complete, but the second, and arguably more important, was my own recovery. I couldn't let what she did consume me forever. I needed to build something new on the ashes of my old life. The first alert chimed on my laptop exactly 1 month after I left. It was a short article in a local business journal. Local entrepreneurs' assets frozen amid fraud investigation. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read. Julian Vance's accounts had been seized pending an investigation into financial irregularities. The article was vague, citing anonymous sources, but I could read between the lines. He had tried to legitimize the fake cash, and the bank, already on high alert from my tip, had caught it. The system had worked perfectly. They had walked right into it. A week later, another alert. This time it was a public record. An eviction notice filed against Julian and Elara Vance for their luxury downtown apartment. The reason cited was non-payment of rent. I pictured their shock, their confusion as their debit cards were declined, their checks bounced. I imagined the panic setting in as they realized their entire financial foundation was a lie. The money they had used for the deposit, for the first month's rent, it had all been my worthless paper. It had passed the landlord's initial inspection, but it had never survived contact with the banking system. The story began to unfold through a series of increasingly desperate digital breadcrumbs. Another alert linked to a court filing. Julian was suing a car dealership. They had repossessed the sleek, expensive car I'd seen him in. He had likely paid the down payment in cash, my cash, and when the dealership deposited it, the fraud was discovered. He was probably trying to claim he was a victim, that he had been given the fake money, but it wouldn't work. The sheer volume of counterfeit bills tied to him would make him the primary suspect, not a victim. Then came the first article with their names in the headline. Local couple arrested in sophisticated counterfeiting scheme. There was a mugshot of Julian, his confident smirk wiped clean, replaced by a look of bewildered terror. And beside it, a photo of Elara, looking pale and gaunt, the radiant glow I'd last seen on her face completely extinguished. The police had likely searched their apartment and found the rest of my investment, the stacks of meticulously crafted bills waiting to be spent. To the authorities, it would look like they were the masterminds, a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde with a high-end printer and a mountain of debt. The charges were serious: bank fraud, conspiracy, possession of counterfeit currency. They were facing years in prison. The final and most satisfying piece of news didn't come from an alert. It came from a letter forwarded to my new post office box from my old address. It was from Elara, a handwritten, desperate scrawl from jail. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and blame. She wrote that she had been tricked, that Julian had lied to her, that she had no idea the money was fake. She claimed he was a con artist who had seduced her and used her. And then came the part I had been waiting for. She begged for my help. She asked me to tell the police that the money had come from me, that it was a loan, that maybe I had been the one who was scammed and had passed the money to them unknowingly. She wanted me to corroborate her story, to become her alibi, to save her from the prison cell she was writing from. She wrote about the good times we'd had, about our dream of the lake house, appealing to the memory of the man she thought I was, the steady, reliable, forgiving fool. She had no idea that the fool she remembered was the architect of her ruin. I read the letter once, then twice. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering love. Just a profound, empty quiet. Her fate was sealed, not by me, but by her own greed and betrayal. My plan had never been about sending them to prison. Not really. That was just a side effect. My true revenge was in forcing her to live with the consequences of her choices, to see the life she threw away for a fortune that turned to dust in her hands. It was about her sitting in a cold cell, realizing that the man she had so casually discarded was the one person who held the key, and that he would never, ever use it. I walked out to the edge of the lake, her letter in my hand. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and purple. I tore the letter into small pieces and let the wind carry them away, scattering them across the surface of the water where they floated for a moment before sinking into the deep. My vengeance was complete. It hadn't been loud or explosive. It had been a quiet, meticulous dismantling of a life built on lies, executed with the same patience and precision I had once used to save for a dream. And as I stood there, breathing in the clean, cold mountain air, I realized I was finally free. My dream of the lake house wasn't dead. It had just been deferred. And now I could build it for myself.